Hello, welcome to this water tutorial. And now, first off, I won't be able to explain the artistic side of things because that depends on your project and what you're doing. Is it an island? Is it a character in the water? Is there land, not land? You know, there's a lot of simple little things that affect how you're going to be creating the water. So it really depends on how you guys want to make your water. But I will be explaining the node setup and how to get your nodes where they need to be, how to get the water to look like what you see on the screen, and that should get you started in the right direction. And I hope that this goes pretty well. And we'll explain the node first, the node setup first, but this is actually really simple. First off, I want to explain that if you do have trouble with this, you can actually check out a video done by Blender. It's from the Blender conference a couple years ago by Zacharias Reinhardt. Really nice video. He actually explains some stuff about making non-destructive materials, which is what this video is. I have that in the title mainly because I want you guys to be able to check that out right afterwards, and so that it will stick with you, because that is very important video, and I would recommend checking that video out if you're planning on making water, or if you're planning on making any sort of materials using Blender. So let's actually get into this a bit more. There's also a couple other videos on making water, and I'll have that linked in the description. So yeah. Also, the build was built by Kush. But anyways, let me explain the water. So let me scroll down on this. So basically, this entire section over here is pretty well pointless. I don't really do anything special with this. I just have it there just in case I need to use it, because it's actually changing some stuff about the texture. Like the way the texture is coordinated onto the material, and I'm using a wave texture for that, and a noise, and actually using two wave textures. Basically, let me show you what this looks like, which I have an add-on called Node Wrangler, which you can turn on in the preferences over here. Node Wrangler, you can turn that on, and that is actually what will do this. So if I actually look at this, let's check this out. So this is our material for there you go. This is our material for the water, and as you can see, that is where the waves are. So as you can see, the waves are where that material is on our screen. So this is our wave material here. This is what's making the waves using a black and white texture, because that's how displacements work. Either you're going up or you're going down, and that's a 1 or a 0 or any gray value. So that's how I am creating this little material that we have here. But then also I have another material, which is this, which is the exact same material, just blown up to massive scale. So it's really small scale. So then I have little tiny waves along with the really big waves. They have some variety in there, the detail a little bit, because the robot is like right there, and it's so close to this that it's sort of difficult to get the details to look right. That's one reason why I have this set up here. So this is another bit of really small details, which I used a noise texture for. So this is what a noise texture looks like. I changed it to a color to be black and white, and then I mixed these two together. So as you can see here, this is our end result, as you can see. So this is how it's turning up. Which if I change the way this is, then you can see there's that, and then there's this, which I want that to be back where it was. Maybe a little bit better over in this direction. Probably like that. There we go. That's better. And then I mix that with the waves over here, which you can sort of see, but not very well, because it needed to be very subtle. Because if we go too far, it's just going to look like a repeating mess. But instead, I just tried to get a really very subtle amount of waves in there, which actually I could probably go a little bit higher with that, but you have to be extremely careful, because that can mess up the render very quickly if you go too far, like this. That just looks wrong. I mean, from far away, it doesn't really look that bad, but up close, it just looks awful. So we'll make sure that it's extremely low. Now, obviously, yours is going to be completely different, because it should be. It's because you're going to have to play around with it. That's one reason I mentioned that earlier, is that I can show you what nodes to use. I can show you how to put this color ramp and where to put the numbers exactly, but it doesn't necessarily matter because it's not going to work in every situation. You're going to have to try out different kinds of water, different kinds of nodes, different kinds of textures for what you're doing. So obviously you're just going to play. It's playing. That's the main thing to making the water look really good, is literally playing around, trying out new ideas. If it doesn't work, you can delete it. Now we're going to delete this, well, right after I show you this color setup over here. So I did that same thing so I could adjust the color, which you can see over here. So we have different colors in different areas, which I'm going to turn up the saturation a little bit because I want it to be a bit more noticeable. Basically, it's just little patches in the water where it's a little bit different. Maybe it's fish. I don't know what it is, but I think it ends up making it look a little bit better. And also, there's slightly different colors as well, so we can change. Let's see a value. There you go. I think that's a bit extreme. But you understand the point, hopefully. You understand the point. So let us actually get started with making this material. So I'm not actually going to use the ocean modifier. The ocean modifier is another good example, or another good way of doing this, but you guys will can do that if you want, and you can watch a tutorial on that, which will be linked in the description. So let's add a shader. I'm going to get a principled BSDF with a material output, and we're going to link this up. So here we go. Now I have this linked up. I like separating them a little bit, which makes it fairly easier. And now let's actually get into this and change it to where it's supposed to be. So first off, I'm going to set the roughness down really, really far down to the bottom, because first off, water is not rough. It's extremely smooth because, you know, it's water. So we're also going to change the IOR to 1.333. There we go, because that's what water's IOR is. And then for the transmission, we can set that up to 1. And now we basically have a water material, and you can sort of see that it's it's changing the way that the light is hitting it, which is exactly what we want, because whenever you look at water, it sort of has like a reflective look because it's reflecting over there, but then also you can see the stone down there because of how the light is reflecting off of the glass, which is what we want. Now, next thing I'd recommend is actually changing the roughness to 0.05 or lower, actually, probably like there. To give it a little bit of roughness to brighten it up, because it helps it to be a little bit brighter, because if we have it down really low, sometimes it can make the water seem a little bit darker because how the light gets stuck in there, and a few other things like that. And then with the base color, we can make it pure white, and basically that is a glass texture. So this would be glass, but we're not trying to make glass, we're trying to make water. So let's not make glass, and let's make some water. So what I would do is actually change it slightly to blue, not very far, just ever so slightly in the blue direction, maybe a little bit darker. Of course, I was editing the wrong color, and I was wondering why that didn't look right. But if you actually have it pure black, then it looks like ocean, because you can't really see the bottom of the ocean, though I would recommend whenever you do that, it ends up causing a few issues where the water will be, some of the reflections will be really, really dark. If we turn this up, the reflections are brighter. Dark reflections, bright reflections. That's because we're basically coloring the glass. So for the most part, I would recommend don't go too far down. You can go a little bit further down, but don't go too awfully far, because if you go too far, it's just going to look a little bit wrong. So we want to get a decent amount of gray, but not too far, as I mentioned. So here we go. I believe it is set up. So this is basically what our water shader is. Sorry for interrupting, me from the future. I actually looked up some reference photos after saying that, because I wasn't entirely sure at that point. And I actually discovered that water can get extremely dark, but I was right about the reflections. Sometimes reflections can get a little bit too dark. Wouldn't necessarily recommend complete black, but water can get surprisingly dark. So just make sure whenever you're making your water, if you want to make sure it's extra nice or realistic, definitely check out some reference photos for some inspiration, because that will help you be able to get it exactly how it should be, which, you know, if you're going for a more of a photorealistic look, you definitely should do to make sure that you got it just right. Anyways, back to the video. So now we actually need to get some textures. We're going to get a wave texture, and then we're going to get a noise texture. In fact, I'm not even going to show you the second wave texture just because I showed that you can do that. So you guys should be able to figure it out just by playing around. So I know you guys are smart and you guys can do that. So I'm not going to show you how to do literally everything because you guys know how to do it. So I don't need to explain it. But yeah, we can get a color ramp out, which you can do by Shift A, converter, color ramp. And then we're going to set that into a mix RGB so we can mix the two images together, which they are two images. Here's the first image and here is the second image. And we're going to be mixing the two images together, and let's see what that looks like once I get this hooked up, which this is called a noodle if you didn't already know that. Really interesting name for that, but that's perfectly fine. Let's actually see what some of these do. Darken, burn. Oh, that's actually really... Anyways, I'm just looking through here, seeing what each one of these do, and seeing which one I believe will work the best. Possibly screen, let's see, dodge. I believe dodge is the one I was thinking of. Then there's add, where we can add them on top of each other. Overlay. Let's see, what is next? Yeah, for the most part, I'm just checking all these to make sure that I got this very, very interesting amount of mess ups. There we go. Subtract is another one that looks pretty nice. I'm just going to use mix because I'm not entirely sure which one I want to use. Okay, here we go. So let's see. I want to check this one first because I want to make sure I get this right. I want this to be fairly black for sure. Not fairly black. I want it to be darker than what it is currently. I want to set this to be spline so it has a smoother curve. And I think that looks pretty good. We don't want to go too far. We want to make sure it's mainly gray. And I want to actually go back to our little robot character here, Kush's at least. And I'm going to set this to be around the scale of him because I want it to be mainly for that character. So we have details around the character, and obviously I could scale him up a little bit if I really need to, but for the most part I want to leave this around his size. Let's see if I can get this any smaller. We don't want to go too small. I think that's a fair amount. Detail around 2. Distortion very, very low, because most of the time when I set the distortion up too high like this, it makes it look really, that's a bad example because you can't really see it anymore, but it makes it look very stringy, I guess, because whenever you look at the distortion, as you can see, it's very stringy and it has a lot of these areas that sort of string out. And you think that'd be good for water? It's definitely not good for water. It makes it look very, very, very weird. It has little stringy details in it. So I would recommend keeping your details at like...
Again, refer to reference. I forgot to mention that a lot, but refer to reference if it is a little stringy and it has that those small little wave details in it, then definitely add it. However, for what I was doing, it didn't really necessarily need very many of those kinds of details, though maybe a small amount more. But yeah, as I said, don't refer too much to the specific numbers I say. It's more about what you're trying to make rather than just water. It's the water that you're trying to make, so yours is obviously going to be quite different.
Your distortion around 0.2. I think it's a fair amount. And the details, 2, I guess. I guess we can increase it to 3 or whatever. And let us get this to, let's see what this looks like whenever we put the shader on there. And oops, I forgot to actually link this up to the displacement, and there we go. We already have a fairly decent water shader, and it's already sort of looking pretty good. As you can see, we have the waves in there as well from that, and that actually looks pretty cool, especially from this angle, but we want it to look pretty good from far away as well, not just up close. And I think the water's doing pretty decent so far, and I actually surprisingly think I nailed the detail the first time. This is extremely fidgety because if you increase the detail too much, then it looks like grainy. But if you go too far, it looks like Microsoft kind of deal. So surprisingly, I got it right the first time. And it's going to be different because depending on the size of your disk here, it's going to change how that is. Which I never showed you actually how to make that disk, for those of you who might not know how to make it. So sorry about that. But yeah, if you do want to make this disk, just in case if you don't know, which I assumed you knew, so sorry. But just in case if you don't know, you can go into edit mode and you can literally just click off and you can scroll over like that, press delete vertices, and go back into object mode, and there you go. You got yourself a little disk, and then you can scale that up, but then there's that issue. You can go into right click, and when you right click, there's set origin to mask surface, and boom, there you go, you got yourself a little disk. And now let's move on, because here we go. So get back into rendered view. There we go. This looks pretty good already, but let us get back to our material. So next we want to get this to look pretty good. We have seen and saw, which they both look pretty decent in my opinion. Though there's like this one looks a little weird whenever you have the waves like that, because it looks very choppy. But if you do it right, it can actually look sort of cool. But that one, in my opinion, is a little bit more fidgety, and I wouldn't recommend using saw very often unless you know what you're doing, because it can cause some really interesting shapes. But if you do the detail scale right, you can actually get this to look like waves. And if you do that, there we go. So it's like smaller waves basically. That's how I'm thinking of it. It's that it's a smaller wave, which actually can be good, especially if you're doing like multiple wave textures on your thing, because then you can have these smaller wave textures go along with the bigger wave textures. But instead, obviously, I'm going to be using scene because it gives better waves for what we're doing here. Now I want to set this down a little bit smaller and set the distortion to be around 9 or so. The detail, definitely not that high. Let's see what this looks like. The detail scale definitely needs to be put down a lot, and let's see. We want to make sure it's a fair amount. We don't want to go too far though, because if we go too far, it's going to look really weird. I like turning up the detail a fair amount, and the distortion maybe not that much, 7 or some 4, 7.5. There we go. Turn down the scale, and then we want the pieces to be a little bit thicker, though we want to be careful. Definitely want to be careful. So there, we want that to be like this. We want to make sure that the tip is black, but then we want to make sure we have a lot of gray, because gray in my opinion is probably one of the most important parts of this right here, and we can sort of stretch that out as far as we want for the most part. I think that looks pretty good. Let's actually see what that looks like with the shader. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good wave texture, though a little bit too small. Let's actually change the scale to be a little smaller or bigger scale waves. I think that's pretty good. Then maybe a little bit more, and let's change the location. Be zoomed in, because when it's zoomed in, it actually changes the way that it renders out. So let's actually look at that. See how that's really big? You can do that sort of similar thing right there. So whenever you're zoomed in, it makes that bigger and makes other pieces around it smaller. So let me go to 0, and I'll go to like that, and there we go. I think that should look pretty decent. Maybe not perfect, but should look pretty decent. And there we go. I think that looks pretty good. Though possibly not enough waves. Maybe a few more waves in there, and I think it should be pretty good once we get that in. I think that looks pretty good. And this is basically water already. Though maybe change the noise a little bit, make the noise detail a little bit larger, because we don't want to go too far in one or the other direction. There's so many different things you can do. You can add, more of these, and you could rotate another one. You could rotate this and make this look like completely different. You rotate it from different angles and make this be in certain spots. And then you could have another set of waves being in a slightly different setup. So I could do this, Shift D, and this should be really quick. And I could rotate this, completely different direction. And then I can get another one of these mixed RGBs things over here, and I could smack that in there, smack this over here, and put this over and that, and there we go. Now we got ourselves a set of ocean that's like crisscrossed over there, which looks really cool. But then what if you want this to be factored away in a certain different way? You can get yourself a gradient texture. Let's see what that looks like that. I want this to be down there, and then we want this to be set in a different location for sure, or if we can get it over there, so we can move this. Oh, see, now it's on the other side, and then we could get ourselves that converter color ramp, and then we could change the way this is converted, so we have a lot more gray in there, and we could set the scale to be a little bit down, Oh, messed it up. Let's actually get this to be 0.9. And I messed that up. Let's get this a little bit closer, and right there. Then we can adjust it using the color ramp. And this also is a very good technique I would recommend for you guys to use, as well as using the factor over here. So we can actually take this and we can factor that in the way that this is going to be coming out. And now when we look at this, that means that on this side there's a whole lot of those crisscrosses over here, but then there's less over there because it's gradiating between the two. So then it changes the way it looks from different angles, which is extremely cool and very, very handy. So now, you can keep going further and further and adding more nodes, and it looks like a really complicated node setup. I mean, look at all the nodes that we have going on. We have, all these nodes set up, but really, it was pretty simple. We know what this does. That's simple, simple, simple. Another simple thing, again, pretty much everything in here is pretty simple. The main thing that's complicated is the way it looks. It looks complicated when really it isn't complicated, and you don't really need to worry about it. I mean, we have 4 little sets up here, and it goes into this displacement node, and it's fairly easy. And pretty much you guys can mess around with that as much as you want. You can use whatever textures you want to get this to look right. Whatever this texture is, what does that look like? I don't even know what this looks like. Well, I don't even know what that is, but you can use whatever thing you want. You could just keep messing around with all these different kinds of textures, like this one over here. Magic texture, you could change the depth of that, you could change the scale, distortion, whatever you want. You make it look really weird. So many things that you can use these things for, all sorts of different things. Point density, but you get the point. Basically, play around with it, try out new ideas, try out different things, and yeah, there's not a whole lot more I can really teach you on making this, though for some reason this is stuck in the, I don't know what I did. Oh, there we go. There, yep. But this is our water tutorial. And actually, I'm going to go through the render settings and make sure that there's nothing else that you guys need to know. Pretty much, I keep the light paths. Oh, yep, I definitely need to show you this. So the glossy light paths actually need to be set up a little higher. If I actually turn this all the way down, let me show you how this looks. But if I actually render this out, which should only take a second because I'm setting this down really, 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 really low. I'll render this out real quick. Let's see what this looks like. Oh, then there's no camera in the scene. That's really nice. Let's see what this is. For some reason, it didn't really change it. Anyway, so I'll explain it, and I don't necessarily want to render it right now because I want to get the camera out. I don't want to waste your time, but I'll explain it, and hopefully you'll understand it without the visual example. But it's pretty simple. So basically, your total amount is the total maximum number of bounces for all your things over here. Now, I'd recommend, for most of my scenes, I generally have it set to 1, because that's for the most part all you need, but this is water. So you actually need more bounces of light because of how you want the reflections in there and all that. So I would recommend actually setting this up to be a little bit higher for all of them. Now, I would say at minimum 2. But I would also recommend making sure your transmission, transparency, and glossy be a little bit higher for sure, because sometimes light can be a little bit messed up if you're not careful. So probably 4, just to be careful, but you don't need that on the diffuse. So there we go. I would say around here is what I would put it on, though. Put the 0 on volume, and you can use that. Now for the render samples, I generally go for this times 16, I believe. Nope, that times 1024 is generally what I set it to. That's a pretty decently fast render for what I do. And then also you can use the denoising or the denoise, which is a add-on that I have installed, but many of you probably do not have that. But also there's a whole lot of things that you probably need to have turned on as well, depending on how much you're going to get into editing, which I'll have to do in a different video on editing, compositing, and setting up all that kind of stuff in Cryptomats and why Cryptomats are useful. which many of you may not even know what a cryptomat is, but it's in this section over here. This is extremely useful, as well as the light and some of the data settings in there, though I don't really generally use this at all. And I haven't even really used this at all yet, but I've definitely used, I haven't used the cryptomat either, but I have had a situation where I should have used it, but I didn't, which was the Bob Ross like build painting thing I did. Yeah, I should have used that, but I didn't. So there's a whole lot of stuff that you guys can learn about that, and I definitely need to make a video on that. So yeah, there's not really anything else I can really think of that you guys might need to know. Just yeah, comment down below if you have any issues or if you anything like that, so I can come and check that out and see what you need. Also, make sure to go on Twitter, and I'll have a link to that in the description to my Twitter, so you guys can actually DM me or tweet me or whatever. I would recommend tweet, so then other people can see what we're talking about, so other people can see your renders. And if you do a render that's using water, or even if you just do any kind of render, I would love to check out your renders and give you some advice, or just see your renders. I would really like to see what you guys are up to. So that's pretty much it. I hope you have a great, wonderful, sublime day, and God bless.